Hi everyone, this is going to be a review or maybe a book discussion. I haven't decided whether or not I'm going to spill the beans and discuss spoilers, but I'll just see how I go with this conversation. So the book is Sarah's Key, and it is by Tatiana de Rosnay, and it's mainly about a girl named Sarah. She's 10 years old, and her parents are taken away. She and her parents are taken away by French officers in 1942, and this is when the World War II broke out. Jewish families are rounded up and taken to this indoor bicycle stadium, and there was like a holding place, and later on they're transported to Auschwitz. But Sarah, in order to save her younger brother, puts her brother in a hiding place in a cupboard and locks him in there. And the story kind of unfolds and keeps the reader guessing whether or not Sarah is able to get her brother out of the cupboard, or whether or not he's alive. And there's another story kind of interweaves with the main story, and it goes into the present and talks about this journalist, and her name is Julia. Research, and her life and Sarah's life kind of intertwines, and Julia does a lot of the research and discovers what happens to Sarah. And anyways, so this book, when I first started reading it, I had to slow myself down because I just wanted to finish it. It was so good. It kind of like pulls the reader in, just the way the story kind of hooks the reader. It caught my attention, and I wanted to finish it that night, but I do this review and talk about it, so I wanted to kind of pay attention to the details. It does read really fast. It's an easy read. The last 30 pages, it does kind of slow down a lot, which is kind of a abrupt change of pace in the writing, because just the way it slowed down so much, it was a kind of a abrupt change, like I said. But I didn't mind it. It did have to kind of tie up. Well, we didn't have to tie up some loose ends. I felt like the very end, the way it ended, wasn't too surprising, so that was a little bit of, it just happened. So you kind of, I expected that. So, this book has really heavy subject matter. It has to do with human suffering, humiliation, just being degraded by another group, the Holocaust and people suffering. And as I was reading this book, I realized, like, I was talking to a friend of mine who had read this book, and she has young kids around the same age, and she's Jewish, and other people who have experienced trauma, maybe not similar to this book. Usually I shouldn't say that, but I found that some people don't like to read about it, or they may read about it and didn't experience any of this, what happened in the story. It's kind of a story that I probably will read it once and not read it again. It's kind of like movies like Schindler's List or The Pianist, or anything that has to do with human suffering. It's just really hard to watch unless that is your specialty, like if you do research. And de Rosnay writes about the girl in the book for a long time. Well, actually, throughout the whole book, girl did this, girl, whatever, said this. I was thinking, as a reader, we all know who the girl is. So why don't you just say Sarah? It wasn't a big surprise. And so I wonder if that was like an editing error. I don't know. But it was pretty obvious as a reader who the girl was in the story. So I noticed that. Briefly touch upon war. By 57, you realize Sarah's childhood is just lost. Quickly grows up at age of 10 because of the war. She gets to see her parents her mom and dad at their weakest. And at one point, Sarah like kind of looks down upon her mother, but know how we will react to life and death situation, especially during a war. And that also made me, there was a point where I felt like I was very critical of what Sarah did in the book, and maybe I won't give that one away. But it really made me, my initial reaction was anger, because I was thinking, how could she make that decision when she has her family? But, like I said, that's just coming from my point of view. And I had mentioned in my other channel, my mother was a child of war. She lost both of her parents when she was 4, and she also lost her sister during the Korean War. And what happened to her family during a war, and I won't go into that because that will kind of give away what happened in the book. It made me really angry at times. I wasn't there. I wasn't the one going through the hardship. I mean, that's an understatement. A war that can have on the people who are experiencing it, and also, the generation to come. And it really made me, made me appreciate the fact that I grew up in a time, or living in a time, where I'm not experiencing war in my hometown. Of course, our country's been in war, but it's always been away. So, and then to know that in other parts of the world there are civil wars going on, and other wars, it's just, I can't imagine. Very devastating. Thing that I like to mention, while I was reading this book, you get sometimes, or as a reader, I got to a point where you're like, oh, how can French people do this? How could they be bystanders? I mean, not all French people. But there were some people who did that in France. But I feel like in a lot of our societies, I don't want to say all, because I don't know, but communities, countries, there are incidents of atrocities, and they may not want to admit it, or we may not want to admit it, but it happens all the time and it starts off very small. I learned that. And I'm going to show you this book. It's called The Bully, the Bullied, and the Bystander. And the author, Barbara Coloroso, she came to one of my schools that I taught at, and she spoke about, about actually bullying in school. But Coloroso brought up the fact that we all can play the bully, the bullied, or the bystanders. Those roles are interchangeable, and at times, it's not a fixed, but we have to be aware where we are in those 3 roles and try to control our behavior or modify it. Coloroso made a really astounding statement that made me think twice, or more than twice. But she did a lot of work in, I think it's Rwanda, where genocide occurred. Or she said that it takes just the simple thought of disdain, or putting better than someone else, be indifference, just like, even though it seems minor or very small, that can snowball into something big as genocide. And she made that link, and I thought, wow, I hadn't thought about that. But if I'm not an expert on history, but we're not regarded highly in Germany. And then the economy fell at that time, and just that, it started with that feeling of, people felt superior to Jewish people. Hitler did not come into power just out of thin air. Bill was prepared for Hitler to grow because of the disdain for Jewish people and the bad economy and the political structure, or the government. It's not a unique situation, because it's happened throughout history where, somebody who is like in Cambodia, also just kind of crazy, Pol Pot, is that his name, Pol Pot, who came into power, and you just think, how did these people come into power and commit such atrocities? But, so that's my little connection that I made. But overall, would I wear a key? Yes, I would. I think you will learn things that you didn't know about. Like, I didn't know that happened in France. Like I said, I am not a history buff. I don't have a lot of historical facts. I'm still learning. But you will learn about what happened in France during World War II. And on the side, about the story about Julia, the minor story with the journalist who's digging up Sarah's past. That story, it did keep me kind of interested. I wanted to know what happened to her. So that was okay. Of course, her husband wasn't very likable. That's an understatement again. But I think towards the end, I did feel a little bit of sympathy for him. So that wraps up my discussion or review, discussion with myself about Sarah's Key, or on Sarah's Key. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.